So the bad news is that I have a new idea for a shallow themed tank. This will be tank number 10. But the good news is that I'm going to set it up. This is the first time I try a setup like this. It's called the Wallstad method, and you use normal dirt or organic plant soil in this case as the base of the tank, and then you seal that soil and nutrients with a thick layer of sand or gravel. I think you're supposed to add water to the soil before adding the sand so you can get rid of air bubbles, but I forgot to do that. So if you're trying this, make sure you do that. Anyways, here's the first couple pounds of sand to seal the soil, and then here's the surface layer of sand. And this is the color I want at the very top, so I'm just gonna push this top layer down to make it look like there's only this darker sand in here and nothing else. But that completes the first part of this tank. Alright, so now I can set up the hardscape. I had 4 different ideas in mind, so I set them all up, and here's what they all look like. There is quite a bit of this limestone rock where I live, so it was easy for me just to pick up the stones I thought would look nice and place them in here. The color also matches the sand, so it worked out nicely and it didn't cost me anything. This last hardscape had some really cool caves and tunnels through the rock, but all I had to do now was decide which hardscape to go with. One of the most important steps is to clean this rock to get rid of any pollutants and debris that might be toxic to the fish. So just a simple scrub with hot water will do. And I ended up choosing hardscape number 2 because I thought it would look awesome with all its caves it has and how high it sticks out of the tank. Plus it'll leave plenty of room for the next piece of hardscape that'll go in the tank. I added more sand to slope the tank from front to back and also to blend the rocks into the sand a little bit. Alright, so now it's time to flood the tank and get some plants in here. And I think this might be one of the first times there's been a fire inside a fish tank before water in there. But anyways, we have the desert look going on right now, and I really like it. But in order for this ecosystem to function, it needs plants. So I'm going to steal them from these themed tanks that I set up in a previous video. And since these plants have been growing in a very similar environment, they should do well in here and probably help cycle the tank as well. Now, for those who have never seen Star Wars, this is an X-Wing, and I really like how it looks right here in the middle. The goal was for it to look like an old crash landing. Alright, now I'm going to put this light on here, and it almost didn't fit because of how big the rock is. And I'm also adding a small little water pump just to give the tank some circulation. And lastly, I'll be adding a water heater just because this tank's gonna sit right next to the window. After a few days, I decided to remove the plants at the front. Although the plants were small, I didn't want them to cover up the hardscape as they grew, and I also wanted space for the fish to be out in the open. Alright, so it's time to introduce the very first line of caretakers into the tank. These are a small group of shrimp and a small army of ostracods, and these two are going to help establish the tank. They'll feed on algae and any biofilm on the surface of the water, plus they'll reproduce and eventually be part of the food chain in here. So now that the tank is all set up and is planted, it's time to just leave it alone and let it do its thing. So I'm going to move it right here in the corner of my living room for the next few weeks and just let it grow. Alright, so after a few weeks, everything has adapted really well and the plants are all doing great. Plus, there's a lot more ostracods in here and a few baby shrimp swimming around. So I'm glad to see everything is doing well. And I think the tank is now cycled and well set up that it can fit some fish in here. So I'll be looking around to see what I get. A few weeks later, this tank now has a ton of baby shrimp swimming around, and they have kept this tank very clean. The plants have also grown across the surface of the water, and if I zoom in on this rock, you can see all the ostracods moving around, and there's thousands of them in here now. Alright, and it's time for some new additions to the tank. First up are these pygmy corydoras. These are about the same size as the shrimp in the tank, if not smaller. Next up are the 6 very tiny sparkling gouramis, and these guys have very shiny blue eyes. These corydoras will stay very still for a few minutes at a time, and then we'll jump right into sifting through the sand looking for food. I tend to see them in groups, so it's nice to see them swim around together. They're also very unbothered by whatever is going on around them, so you can see them out in the open or hiding somewhere, and it really makes no difference to them what's around them. The colors of the gouramis are starting to come in, and I've also noticed that these fish are always sneaking around, and they're also very curious when they see movement around the tank. They'll quickly begin to investigate. Now that there's a mix between the fish and the shrimp, I do hope that they all get along and eat the food that they're supposed to eat. A week later, the water in the tank became very murky and I couldn't tell why. But then I noticed that the corydoras spent most of their day digging into the sand and kicking up dust, and that was the only reason that made any sense to me. While I try to figure out a way to make the water clear again, I captured all the personalities in the tank. The corydoras having a good time swimming together, and the gouramis sneaking around the tank again. They do this thing where they hide and then peek out at me, and it's really funny because they are very good at it. And I just never really see fish going into plants like this just to get a better hiding spot as these gouramis do. And it's really impressive, but at the same time, they're always hiding. You may have noticed by now that there are no more shrimp walking around like there used to be, and even with a lot of food, they don't seem to show up anymore. So I think that the gouramis may have taken them out, which is not what I was hoping for, but it just seemed to happen. On the other hand, I came up with a plan to take care of this murky water, so let's see if it works. First, I'm going to try and replace as much water, and as I get the water out, I'll try to get some of the dust out as well. And once I fill up the tank with clear water, I know that the corydoras are just gonna make it murky again, so I think I'm gonna use the pump in here to try and get some more of that dust out. And I'm gonna dig up that pump and place a hose on it, and we're gonna make that water go up the rock and make the rock be the filter of the tank. So as water flows down into the tank, it should allow some of that dust to collect onto the rock. And since we now have a waterfall, I can also add some moss here. This should grow in over the next few weeks, and in the meantime, I'll be looking to see if there's any fish that can replace the shrimp and all the ostracods that kept this tank so clean. Thanks for watching.